Commander Hyun-woo Park stood on the bridge of the UES Determination, watching the stars through the main window. His ship was humanity's first vessel to travel this far from Earth. They had been exploring space for 3 months now, mapping new systems and looking for signs of alien life. "Commander," called So-young Kim from her station. She was the ship's tactical officer, a young woman with sharp eyes and quick reflexes. "I'm getting strange readings on the scanner. Something big is coming our way." Hyun-woo walked over to her. Console. The green screen showed several large objects moving toward them at incredible speed. "How big are we talking about?" "Each one is at least 5 times the size of our ship," So-young replied, her voice tense. "And there are 12 of them." Engineer Taemin Lee looked up from his workstation. "Sir, those ships are using technology we've never seen before. Their engines are producing energy levels that should be impossible." Before Hyun-woo could respond, the ship's communication system came alive with a harsh alien voice. The words were translated by their computer, but the tone was cold and threatening. "Primitive vessel, you have entered the territory of the Vorthak Empire. I am War Prime Kelthax of the Conquest Fleet. You will surrender immediately or be destroyed." The main screen lit up, showing the face of an alien creature. Kelthax had gray skin, 4 eyes, and a mouth full of sharp teeth. His uniform was covered in symbols that looked like military decorations. "This is Commander Park of the United Earthship Determination," Hyun-woo replied calmly. "We come in peace. We're explorers, not warriors." Kelthax made a sound that might have been laughter. "Peace? Your species carries primitive weapons. We have scanned your vessel. You use metal projectiles fired by chemical explosions. How crude." The alien leader gestured to someone off-screen. Suddenly, the Determination was surrounded by the 12 alien ships. Each one was massive, with smooth hulls that seemed to absorb light. Strange energy patterns danced across their surfaces. "Your weapons are pathetic," Kelthax continued. "We have conquered 47 worlds with our energy weapons. Your guns cannot even scratch our shields. Surrender now, and your deaths will be quick." Hyun-woo looked at his crew. They were scared, but none of them showed any sign of wanting to give up. "We don't surrender," he said simply. Kelthax quote. S4 eyes widened in surprise. "What did you say?" "I said we don't surrender. If you want our ship, you'll have to take it." The alien leader was quiet for a moment. In all his years of conquest, no species had refused to surrender when faced with superior firepower. Most civilizations took one look at Vorthak technology and immediately gave up. "Foolish creatures," Kelthax finally said. "You will learn the price of defying the Vorthak Empire." The communication ended, and the alien ships began moving into attack formation. "So-young, what do we have for weapons?" Hyun-woo asked. 12 railguns, basic missiles, and some defensive lasers," she replied. "Nothing that should work against their technology." "Taemin, how are our engines?" "Running at full capacity, sir, but their ships are faster than us." Hyun-woo thought quickly. The aliens expected them to fight like other civilizations they had conquered. They probably had strategies for dealing with energy weapons and standard space combat tactics. But humans had always been good at fighting dirty. "Taemin, can you overload our reactor without destroying the ship?" The engineer's eyes lit up with understanding. "I can make it look like we're about to explode, yes, sir." "So-young, prepare to jettison our cargo bay. Load it with everything explosive we have." "Sir, that's our food supplies and—" "Do it." The Vorthak ships opened fire. Beams of blue energy struck the Determination's shields, draining their power rapidly. The human ship shook under the assault. "Shields at 60%, So-young reported. "Now, Taemin." The engineer triggered the reactor overload sequence. Warning lights flashed all over the ship and alarms began blaring. To the Vorthak sensors, it would look like the human ship was having a catastrophic failure. "Taemin, kill our engines and let us drift," Hyun-woo ordered. "Make it look like we're dead in space." The Determination went dark and began tumbling, slowly. The Vorthak ship stopped firing and moved closer to examine their apparently defeated enemy. "They're taking the bait," So Young whispered. Three of the alien ships approached within close range. Kelthax's voice came over the radio again. Surrender, now, and we will make your end swift. We have a message for you, Yunwu replied. This is how humans say goodbye. So Young pressed the button to jettison the cargo bay. The container, packed with explosives and debris, shot toward the nearest Vorthak ship. At the same moment, Taemin brought the reactor back online and fired the engines at maximum power. The cargo bay exploded against the alien ship's hull. The Vorthak shields, designed to stop energy weapons, offered little protection against physical debris traveling at high speed. The explosion tore a hole in the ship's side. The Determination shot forward, using the confusion to escape. The remaining Vorthak ships gave chase, but the humans had gained precious time. Their shields work differently than ours, So Young observed as they fled. They're designed to stop energy, not solid objects. Good to know, Hyunwoo said. What's our status? We damaged one of their ships, but they're still following us, Taemin reported. We can't outrun them forever. The chase continued for hours. The Vorthak ships were faster, but the humans kept using unexpected tactics. They dropped mines made from spare parts, changed direction at random intervals, and even used their garbage as a distraction. Finally, they reached the edge of the solar system where they had hidden a small probe. The probe contained a quantum communicator that could send messages instantly across vast distances. Get me a connection to Earth, Hyunwoo ordered. The signal went through, and soon they were talking to Admiral Jin Ho Choi at Earth Defense Command. Commander Park, what's your status? The Admiral asked. Sir, we've made contact with a hostile alien empire called the Vorthak. They have superior technology and consider humans primitive. They're coming to conquer Earth. There was silence on the other end of the line. Finally, Admiral Choi spoke. How long do we have? Based on their speed, maybe 6 months if they go straight to Earth after they finish with us. And their weapons? Energy-based, very advanced. But their shields are weak against physical attacks. They've never fought anyone who uses kinetic weapons. Understood. Get back here as fast as you can. We'll prepare for war. The communication ended just as the Vorthak ships caught up. More energy beams struck the Determination, and this time the shields failed completely. Hull breach on Deck 3, Taemin shouted. Can we make another run for it? Hyunwoo asked. Negative, sir. Engines are damaged. Kelthax's voice came over the radio one last time. Your pathetic escape ends here, humans. Prepare to join the 47 worlds that learned the price of defying the Vorthak. But as the alien ships moved in for the final attack, something unexpected happened. A massive explosion lit up space behind them. One of the Vorthak ships had hit the debris field the humans had left behind. The sharp metal fragments had torn through its hull like paper. In the confusion, the Determination's backup engines came online. Taemin had been quietly repairing them during the chase. The human ship limped away into hyperspace, barely escaping destruction. As they jumped to safety, Hyunwoo looked at his crew. They had survived first contact with a superior alien force through courage, creativity, and pure stubbornness. But he knew this was just the beginning. Set course for Earth, he ordered. We have a war to prepare for. Behind them, Kelthax stared at the empty space where the human ship had been. In all his years of conquest, no primitive species had ever escaped the Vorthak Empire. These humans were different. They fought with primitive weapons, but they refused to give up. For the first time in his military career, War Prime Kelthax felt something he had never experienced before: doubt. 6 months later, Earth's skies filled with alien ships. The Vorthak invasion fleet arrived exactly when Commander Hyunwoo Park had predicted. Admiral Jin Ho Choi stood in the war room deep beneath the Pacific Defense Station, watching the displays that showed hundreds of enemy vessels taking positions around the planet. They're not even trying to hide, said strategist Yoon-ji Song, studying the formation patterns. They think this will be easy. Admiral Choi nodded grimly. Let's hope they keep thinking that. In space above Earth, War Prime Kelthax broadcast his message to the planet below. His massive flagship, the Devastator, positioned itself directly over the largest human cities. "People of Earth," Kelthax's voice boomed across every communication channel. "I am War Prime Kelthax of the Vorthak Empire. Your pathetic species has caught our attention with your primitive weapons and foolish resistance. You have 1 hour to surrender completely, or we will demonstrate why 47 worlds now kneel before our power." In the Underground Command Center, Admiral Choi opened a channel to respond. "This is Admiral Jin Ho Choi of Earth Defense. We have a message for you too. Go to hell." Kelthax was silent for a moment. Once again, these humans refused to surrender. "Very well. You will learn the same lesson as all the others." The Vorthak ships opened fire. Blue energy beams rained down from space, striking Earth's orbital defense platforms. The human stations returned fire with their railguns and missile batteries, but most of their projectiles simply bounced off the alien energy shields. "Shields are holding on most of their ships," reported weapons engineer Dong-Hyun Lim from his position in the orbital command station. "Our standard weapons aren't getting through." But Dong-Hyun had spent the last 6 months working on something special. Based on the intelligence from the Determination's encounter, he had developed new ammunition for their railguns. Instead of solid metal slugs, these rounds contained electromagnetic pulse charges designed to disrupt energy fields. "All stations switched to EMP rounds," Dong-Hyun ordered. The human weapons fired again. This time, the results were different. The electromagnetic pulses didn't destroy the Vorthak shields, but they made them flicker and weaken. Some of the human projectiles got through, striking alien hulls. "Impossible," Kelthax roared from his flagship. "Their primitive weapons should not affect our shields." On Earth's surface, pilot Hana Yoon led a squadron of fighters up through the atmosphere. The human ships were small and fast compared to the massive Vorthak vessels. Hana had trained for this moment, studying every piece of data from the first encounter. "Remember, we can't win a straight fight," she told her pilots over the radio. "We have to be smarter than them." The human fighters scattered in all directions, using tactics the Vorthak had never seen before. Instead of forming neat battle lines like other species, the humans spread out randomly. They hid behind debris, used the planet's atmosphere to mask their approach, and attacked from unexpected angles. Ha-na S fighter dove through a cloud of space junk, emerging right next to a Vorthak destroyer. She fired her weapons at point-blank range, targeting the spots where the ship's shields were weakest. The alien vessel shuddered under the impact. "Their shields have gaps near their engine ports," she reported to the other pilots. "Hit them there." The human fighters swarmed around. The larger alien ships, like angry wasps, the Vorthak tried to swat them with their main weapons, but the energy beams were too slow to track the small, fast-moving targets. Kelthax watched the battle with growing frustration. His ships were more powerful than the human vessels, but the humans fought in ways that made no tactical sense. They took terrible losses but kept attacking. When their weapons failed, they rammed his ships. When their fighters were destroyed, the pilots ejected and continued fighting with personal weapons. "War Prime," his tactical officer reported. "We have lost 6 ships and 17 more are damaged. The humans are using suicide tactics." Suicide tactics? Kelthax had never heard the term before. In Vorthak culture, when a battle was lost, warriors retreated to fight another day. The idea of deliberately dying to cause enemy damage was completely alien to them. On the surface of Earth, the battle was just as fierce. Vorthak landing ships had deployed ground forces in major cities. The aliens were shocked to discover that human civilians joined the fighting alongside their military. Dr. Mi Young-seo had been a university professor before the invasion. Now she led a group of students and faculty in defending their campus from alien troops. They had no formal military training, but they had something the Vorthak didn't understand. They were fighting for their home. "Use the chemistry lab supplies," Mi-young told her people. "Those cleaning chemicals can be turned into weapons if you mix them right." The humans fought the Vorthak in the streets, in buildings, in sewers and subway tunnels. Every block became a battlefield. The aliens had expected organized military resistance, but instead they faced an entire population that refused to give up. Kelthax received reports from his ground commanders that painted an increasingly troubling picture. The humans weren't just fighting with their military. Old people threw things from windows, children carried messages between resistance groups. Even their wounded continued to fight until they physically couldn't move. "This is madness," Kelthax muttered, reading another report about humans using kitchen knives against soldiers with energy weapons. In space, the battle had turned into a brutal stalemate. The Vorthak ships were more advanced, but the humans had numbers and determination. Every time the aliens destroyed a human vessel, two more appeared to take its place. Admiral Choi coordinated the defense from his underground bunker. "Status. Report," he called out. "We've lost 60% of our orbital stations," reported an aide. "But the Vorthak have lost 20 ships. Their advance has stopped." "What about ground forces?" Yunji Song looked up from her tactical display. "They're having trouble taking the cities. Our people are fighting them street by street." Admiral Choi allowed himself a small smile. The Vorthak had superior technology, but they clearly didn't understand human nature. They expected conquered people to stay conquered. On his flagship, Kelthax was having the same realization. He had conquered 47 worlds, but none of them had fought like this. Other species surrendered when they realized they couldn't win. Humans seemed to fight harder when things looked hopeless. "War Prime," his communications officer announced, "we're receiving a message from the Vorthak High Command." The holographic image of Supreme War Leader Thirak appeared on the bridge. Thirak was ancient even by Vorthak standards, with scars covering his gray skin from hundreds of battles. "Kelthax," Thirak's voice was cold with displeasure. "Explain why this primitive world has not yet fallen." Kelthax hesitated. In his entire military career, he had never had to request reinforcements. "Supreme War Leader, these humans are different. They refuse to surrender even when facing certain death. They use tactics we have never encountered. They are primitives, with metal-throwing weapons," Thirak snapped. "How can they possibly resist the might of the Vorthak Empire?" "Their weapons are primitive, yes," Kelthax admitted, "but their resolve is unlike anything we have faced. They seem to prefer death to surrender." Thirak was quiet for a long moment. "This is unprecedented." "Very well. I will send additional forces, but Kelthax, if you cannot crush these humans even with reinforcements, you will face the consequences of failure." The communication ended, leaving Kelthax staring at the tactical display. His ship still outnumbered the humans and his technology was far superior. But for the first time in his military career, he wasn't certain of victory. On Earth, the battle continued to rage. In orbit, Han Ayun's fighter squadron had been reduced to half its original size, but they kept fighting. On the ground, Dr. Mi Young Seo's civilian resistance had held their university against 3 separate Vorthak assaults. The aliens were learning a hard lesson about humanity. They had feared human guns when they first encountered them, thinking the primitive weapons were laughably weak. But guns were just tools. The real weapon was the human spirit that refused to break, no matter how hopeless the situation became. As night fell over the battered Earth, both sides prepared for the long war ahead. The Vorthak had expected a quick conquest, but the humans had other plans. They would fight for every street, every building, every inch of their world. And somewhere in the depths of space, Vorthak reinforcements were already on their way, bringing with them weapons and warriors that had crushed dozens of civilizations. But they were about to learn what Kelthax was beginning to understand. Superior firepower meant nothing against an enemy that simply refused to quit. The siege of Earth had lasted 3 months when Marine Captain Jae-sung Kang led his team into the belly of a Vorthak destroyer. The alien ship hung dead in space, its shields down after a human kamikaze attack had damaged its power systems. Now it was Jae-sung's job to board it and gather intelligence. "Remember," he told his Marines through their helmet radios, "these aliens have never fought anyone who uses close combat. They won't expect us to get this personal." The Marines cut through the ship's hull with plasma torches and crawled inside. The interior was designed for beings larger than humans with high ceilings and wide corridors. Everything glowed with a blue light that hurt their eyes. "Motion detected ahead," whispered Corporal Boram Lee, checking her scanner. 20 contacts, moving this way. "Fix bayonets," Jae-sung ordered quietly. The Vorthak security team rounded the corner expecting to find human soldiers with projectile weapons. Instead, they found themselves face-to-face with Marines carrying combat knives and bayonets, charging at them in the narrow corridor. The aliens had energy weapons that could kill at long range, but they had never trained for knife fighting. In the cramped ship corridors, their large size worked against them. The human Marines were smaller, faster, and absolutely savage in close combat. J-Sung S blade found the gap in a Vorthak soldier's armor. The alien warrior, trained to fight from a distance, had no idea how to defend against a human with a knife, who seemed completely unafraid of dying. The battle was brutal and short. When it was over, the Marines had taken the ship's computer core and captured 3 Vorthak prisoners. They had also learned something important. The aliens were terrified of close combat. Back on Earth, Dr. Mi-young Seo was studying captured Vorthak technology in her makeshift laboratory. She had been a xenobiologist before the war, specializing in theoretical alien lifeforms. Now she was humanity's expert on their actual alien enemies. "Their psychology is completely different from ours," she explained to Admiral Jin-ho Choi during a secure video call. "They fight wars like a business calculation. When the cost becomes too high, they expect their enemies to surrender." "And we don't surrender," Admiral Choi said. "Exactly. They can't understand why we keep fighting when we're clearly losing. It's driving them crazy." Mi-young had discovered something else during her research. The Vorthak had conquered 47 worlds, but they had never faced prolonged resistance. Most species surrendered after their first major defeat. "They have no experience with guerrilla warfare," Mi-young continued. "Their entire military doctrine is based on overwhelming force leading to quick surrender. They don't know how to fight an enemy that won't give up." This intelligence led to a new strategy. Instead of trying to match Vorthak firepower, humans would make the war as personal and brutal as possible. They would force the aliens to fight the kind of battle they feared most. Special Forces Commander Woo Jin-han received orders to implement what was called the Wolverine Protocol. The name came from the small earth animal that would fight creatures many times its size and never back down. "We're going to make them scared," Woo Jin told his team during their briefing. "Every Vorthak soldier needs to know that humans will keep coming, no matter what." The Special Forces began a campaign of terror against the occupation forces. They would appear out of nowhere, strike hard, and disappear before the aliens could respond. They used captured Vorthak weapons when possible, but they also used improvised explosives, poison, and anything else that could kill. The psychological effect on the Vorthak was devastating. Soldiers who had conquered dozens of worlds now jumped at shadows. They stopped patrolling alone and refused to enter human buildings without massive backup. In space, the war had taken on a different character. The Vorthak still had superior ships, but they were learning to fear human desperation. Captain So-young Kim, now commanding her own destroyer, had perfected the art of ramming attacks. "All hands, prepare for collision," she announced to her crew as her damaged ship headed straight for a Vorthak cruiser. "It's been an honor serving with you." The human ship struck the alien vessel at full speed. Both ships were destroyed in the explosion, but the psychological impact on the Vorthak fleet was enormous. The aliens began to realize that humans would literally die just to take one enemy with them. Kelthax watched the destruction from his flagship and felt something he had never experienced in his military career. Fear. Not fear of death, which all warriors understood, but fear of an enemy that seemed to welcome death as long as they could drag their foes down with them. "War Prime," his tactical officer reported. 3 more ships have requested permission to withdraw from close combat positions. The crews are nervous." Kelthax understood why. His soldiers were trained to fight other rational beings who valued their own lives. Humans seemed to be something else entirely. They fought like the legendary berserkers from ancient Vorthak mythology, warriors who cared nothing for their own survival. The reinforcements from the Vorthak High Command arrived 2 weeks later. Supreme War Leader Thyrak's massive dreadnought emerged from hyperspace, along with 50 additional warships. Thyrak had come personally to see what kind of primitive species could resist the might of the Vorthak Empire. "Show me these humans," Thyrak demanded when he arrived on Kelthax's flagship. The tactical display showed the current state of the battle. Human resistance had not weakened despite months of fighting. If anything, they seemed to be getting more desperate and dangerous. "They refuse to follow standard military doctrine," Kelthax explained. "They use civilian populations as combatants. They sacrifice themselves for minimal tactical gain. They fight with primitive weapons even when facing impossible odds." Thyrak studied the data with growing disbelief. This is not how civilized warfare is conducted. Where are their surrender negotiations? Their attempts at diplomatic solutions? They have made no such attempts, Supreme War Leader. When we offer terms, they respond with obscenities and renewed attacks. On Earth's surface, the arrival of Vorthak reinforcements had not gone unnoticed. Resistance leader Byung-ho Kim, AOAZ, former construction worker turned guerrilla fighter, gathered his cell leaders in an abandoned subway tunnel. "They've brought more ships," he told the assembled fighters. "But ships can't hold ground. They still need soldiers on the surface, and every soldier on the surface can be killed." The resistance had learned to use the human environment against their enemies. The Vorthak were large, clumsy beings who had evolved on a world with wide open spaces. Earth's cities, with their narrow alleys and tight spaces, were perfect for ambush tactics. Young rebels like Da-Yun Choi, barely 16 years old, carried messages between resistance cells through networks of sewers and maintenance tunnels. The Vorthak never suspected that human children were part of the military effort. "They can bomb our cities," Da-Yun said during one meeting, "but they can't bomb every building. We'll just keep moving." Factory worker Young-Sik Park had turned his manufacturing plant into a weapon. Instead of making consumer goods, his workers now produced improvised explosives using industrial chemicals. The Vorthak tried to secure the factories, but sabotage was constant. "Every bolt, every wire, every chemical mixture," Young-Sik told his workers. "Everything we make either helps us or hurts them. There's no neutral ground in this war." The psychological pressure on the Vorthak forces continued to mount. They had conquered other worlds by demonstrating their superior technology and waiting for surrender. But humans seemed immune to fear of superior firepower. Thyrak ordered a massive bombardment of Earth's major cities, hoping to break human morale. Instead, the destruction only made the resistance more determined. Survivors crawled out of the rubble and immediately began planning their next attack. "This is impossible," Thyrak finally admitted to Kelthax. "How do we defeat an enemy that grows stronger from defeat?" "I do not know, Supreme War Leader," Kelthax replied honestly. "Perhaps these humans cannot be defeated in the traditional sense." For the first time in Vorthak history, their military leaders were considering the unthinkable, that there might be some enemies who simply could not be conquered. The humans had inferior technology and smaller numbers, but they possessed something the Vorthak had never encountered before. They had the absolute refusal to accept defeat, no matter how hopeless their situation became. And that refusal was beginning to spread on other worlds throughout the Vorthak Empire. Enslaved species had begun to hear stories about the small blue planet where the inhabitants refused to surrender. Some had even begun to wonder if humans could resist the Vorthak. Maybe surrender wasn't the only option. The seeds of something dangerous were being planted throughout the galaxy. The Vorthak had always ruled through fear of their superior technology. But the humans were teaching the galaxy a different lesson. Sometimes the will to fight was more powerful than any weapon. The orbital bombardment began at dawn. Supreme War Leader Thyrak had lost patience with the human resistance and ordered his fleet to destroy Earth's major cities from space. Blue energy beams rained down from the sky, turning buildings into dust and killing millions in the first hour. President Kyung-Soo-an watched the destruction from his bunker deep beneath the Rocky Mountains. The command center's screens showed city after city disappearing under alien fire. New York, London, Tokyo, Seoul, all were being systematically destroyed. "Sir?" his aide whispered, The Vorthak are broadcasting another surrender demand. Put it on screen, President On replied. Thirak, quote, S scarred face appeared on the monitor. Behind him, the bridge of his massive dreadnought was filled with tactical displays showing Earth's destruction. People of Earth, Thirak announced, your major population centers are being destroyed as I speak. Your military resistance has collapsed. This is your final opportunity to surrender before we eliminate your entire species. President An activated the response channel. His face, worn by months of war but still defiant, appeared on screens throughout the Vorthak fleet. This is President Kyung-Soo An of Earth. I have a message for you and all your warriors. We will never surrender. You can destroy our cities, but you cannot destroy our will. Every human you kill will be avenged by 10 more. The transmission ended, and President An turned to his staff. Activate the Lazarus Protocol. If they want to burn our world, we'll make sure they pay for every ashes. The Lazarus Protocol was humanity's last, desperate plan. Hidden bases around the world contained weapons and supplies for continued resistance even if the surface was completely destroyed. But more importantly, it contained something the Vorthak didn't know about. Escape ships on the surface. The resistance continued even as the bombardment raged. Former teacher Sunhee Bae led a group of survivors through the ruins of her city. Half her people were wounded, and they had almost no ammunition left, but they kept moving. The subway tunnels are still intact, she told her group. We can reach the supply cache if we move now. A young boy, barely 12 years old, tugged at her sleeve. Teacher Sunhee, why don't we just hide until they go away? Sunhee knelt down to look him in the eyes. Because hiding isn't living, Jinwoo. Our parents and grandparents built this world for us. If we don't fight for it, who will? The boy nodded seriously and picked up a piece of broken concrete to throw at the next Vorthak patrol they encountered. Mechanic Sang-Min Oh had turned his repair shop into a weapons factory. Even as the bombardment continued overhead, he and his workers kept building bombs and improvised weapons. They think they can break us by destroying our cities, he told his team. But cities are just buildings. We're still here and we're still fighting. The psychological effect on the Vorthak forces was becoming severe. They had expected the humans to surrender once their major population centers were destroyed. Instead, the resistance seemed to be getting more vicious. Kelthax received a report from his ground commander that made him question everything he thought he knew about warfare. War Prime, the commander reported. Human resistance has actually increased since the bombardment began. Civilian populations are now actively joining combat operations. We are facing attacks from children and elderly humans who have never had military training. Children? Kelthax was horrified. In Vorthak culture, young ones were protected from warfare until they reached adulthood. Yes, sir. They appear to be using their offspring as soldiers and spies. Some are carrying explosive devices. This violated every principle of civilized warfare that the Vorthak understood. Combat was supposed to be conducted between trained warriors. Not entire populations, including the young and old. Thirak was having similar doubts aboard his flagship. His tactical officers reported that human resistance was spreading even to areas that had been completely destroyed. Survivors were literally fighting from piles of rubble with nothing but stones and improvised weapons. Supreme War Leader, his intelligence officer announced, we have detected several human spacecraft leaving the planet's surface. They appear to be heading for deep space. Escape ships, Thirak mused. Finally, some rational behavior. How many? Unknown, sir. They are using stealth technology we did not know they possessed. Our sensors can only detect them intermittently. What Thirak didn't know was that the human ships weren't carrying refugees. They were carrying volunteers on a one-way mission that would change the course of the war. In a hidden facility beneath the Australian desert, scientist Hyejin Lee made final preparations for humanity's most desperate gamble. Using captured Vorthak technology, her team had built ships capable of reaching other star systems. The navigation data we took from their computers shows the locations of 47 conquered worlds, she explained to the volunteer crews. Your job is to reach those worlds and teach their populations what we've learned here. Young Nam Seo, a former diplomat, had volunteered for the mission despite knowing it was almost certainly suicide. And what exactly have we learned? That surrender is a choice, Hyejin replied simply. Every species the Vorthak conquered chose to give up when faced with superior firepower. But surrender is not the only option. OK Sun Liam, a teacher like Sun He Bae, was also among the volunteers. How do we convince alien populations to resist when they've been slaves for generations? The same way our resistance spreads here, Hyejin said, one person at a time. You show them that it's possible to say no, even to overwhelming force. The escape ships launched under cover of the orbital bombardment. The Vorthak sensors, focused on the destruction below, missed most of them in the chaos. Within hours, dozens of human vessels were heading toward Vorthak-controlled systems at faster-than-light speed. Back on Earth, the resistance entered its darkest phase. The surface of the planet was largely destroyed, and billions were dead. But in underground bunkers, subway tunnels, and hidden caves, humans continued to fight. Resistance leader Byung-ho Kim had lost most of his original cell, but new fighters kept joining every day. Former civilians who had never held weapons before were now expert guerrilla fighters. They've destroyed our cities, he told a gathering of survivors in an abandoned mineshaft. But they haven't destroyed us. Every day they stay on our world, we make them pay a price. The cost to the Vorthak was indeed mounting. They had expected to conquer Earth in weeks and move on to other targets. Instead, they had been fighting for over a year and losing ships and soldiers every day to an enemy that refused to die. More troubling for Thirak were the reports from other parts of the Vorthak Empire. On 3 separate worlds, enslaved populations had begun small uprisings. The rebellions were quickly crushed, but they were unprecedented in Vorthak history. Where did they learn these tactics? Thirak demanded when his intelligence chief briefed him on the uprisings. The rebellions show signs of human influence, Supreme War Leader. It appears that humans have been spreading information about resistance techniques. Thirak was beginning to understand the real danger these humans represented. Their weapons were primitive and their technology was inferior, but they carried something far more dangerous. An idea that could spread like a virus throughout his empire. On the devastated surface of Earth, young Da-un Choi crawled through the rubble of what had once been her school. She was looking for her younger brother, who had been separated from their group during the last bombardment. She found him in a collapsed classroom, injured but alive. As she helped him to safety, he asked her the same question that young Jin Woo had asked teacher Sun Hee. Sister, why don't we just hide until the monsters go away? Taeyun looked around at the destroyed building where she had learned to read and write, where she had dreamed of becoming a doctor. Everything was gone, but she was still here. Because if we hide, they win, she told her brother. And if they win here, they'll do this to other worlds too. We have to fight so that other children somewhere else won't have to go through what we've been through. Her brother nodded, and together they made their way back to the resistance base. Above them, Vorthak ships continued their patrols, but the warriors inside those ships were no longer confident of victory. They had come to Earth expecting to conquer another primitive world. Instead, they had found something that challenged everything they believed about warfare, about civilization, and about the nature of power itself. The humans had taught them that sometimes the strongest weapon was simply the refusal to give up, no matter how hopeless the situation became. And that lesson was spreading beyond Earth, carried by human volunteers to every corner of the Vorthak Empire. The war was far from over, but something fundamental had changed. For the first time in their history, the Vorthak were beginning to fear not just human weapons, but human ideas. 2 years after the first bombardment of Earth, the Vorthak Empire was facing something unprecedented in its history: doubt. Supreme War Leader Thirak stood before the High Command on the capital world of Vorthakia, delivering a report that would have been unthinkable just a few years earlier. The human resistance continues, he announced to the assembled war leaders. Despite complete orbital bombardment, despite the destruction of their major cities, despite casualties numbering in the billions, they refuse to surrender. Elder War Commander, Zathan, scarred veteran of 30 conquered worlds, spoke from the assembly. This is impossible. No species has ever maintained resistance after losing their homeworld. What is different about these humans? Thyric activated a holographic display showing various human resistance actions from across the galaxy. They have spread beyond their homeworld, Elder Commander. Human operatives have reached 17 of our controlled systems and begun teaching local populations resistance techniques. The display showed grainy surveillance footage from the mining world of Kepler 442b. Enslaved miners from the Zelani species, who had surrendered to the Vorthak 50 years earlier, were now refusing work orders and sabotaging equipment. Their leader, a female Zelani named Viraki, stood before a crowd of workers giving a speech that shocked the Vorthak observers. "The humans taught us that surrender is a choice," Viraki declared. "For 50 years we chose slavery because we thought it was better than death. But the humans showed us there are things worse than death. Giving up our freedom is one of them." Back on Earth, Resistance leader Byung-ho Kim received the transmission from Kepler 442b in his underground command center. The message had been relayed through a network of human agents across multiple star systems, each risking their lives to maintain communication with Earth. "The word is spreading," he told scientist Hyojin Lee, who had survived the bombardment and continued developing new technologies for the resistance. 18 worlds now have active rebellions against Vorthak rule. Hyojin looked up from her work on a captured Vorthak communication device. The Vorthak military doctrine has no answer for this kind of warfare. They're designed to fight other organized militaries, not entire populations. She had been studying Vorthak psychology and strategy for 2 years now, learning everything she could about their military culture. They win through intimidation and superior firepower. When those fail, they have no backup plan. The truth of this was becoming evident throughout the Vorthak Empire. On the forest world of Proxima Centauri C, the tree-dwelling Silvani had learned guerrilla tactics from human teacher Oksun Lim. The Silvani used their natural camouflage to launch surprise attacks on Vorthak patrols, then disappear into the canopy. On the ocean world of Glisa 667 CC, aquatic beings called the Narathi had been inspired by human diplomat Young Nam Seo to begin underwater sabotage operations against Vorthak mining platforms. The aliens had never faced an enemy that could attack from beneath the waves. Each rebellion was small and relatively weak, but their psychological impact on the Vorthak was enormous. For the first time in their military history, they were facing resistance on multiple fronts from species they had considered permanently conquered. Thyrak, S tactical officers were reporting increasing problems with morale among Vorthak forces. Soldiers who had once eagerly sought combat assignments now requested transfers away from infected systems where human influence had spread. "The troops are calling it the human virus," reported Fleet Commander Kelvox. "They believe that contact with human ideas is somehow contagious and dangerous." Thyrak understood their fear. He had spent 2 years fighting humans and had never seen anything like their absolute refusal to accept defeat. It was indeed like a virus, an idea that spread from mind to mind, changing how people thought about power and resistance. On Earth, the resistance had evolved into something the Vorthak had never encountered before. No longer a traditional military force, it had become a way of life for the survivors. Children who had been born after the invasion grew up learning that fighting the occupiers was as natural as breathing. Former factory worker Young Sik Park now commanded a network of underground factories that produced weapons and supplies for resistance cells across the planet. His workshops were hidden in subway tunnels, abandoned mines, and even inside the ruins of destroyed buildings. "Every tool we make, every bomb we build, every bullet we cast," he told his workers, "is a message to the Vorthak. We're still here, and we're not going anywhere." The message was having its intended effect. Vorthak forces on Earth had become increasingly paranoid and isolated. They controlled the sky and most of the surface, but they couldn't hold ground without constant vigilance. Every street corner could hide an ambush. Every building could contain a bomb. The psychological warfare was taking its toll on individual Vorthak soldiers as well. Many had developed what human psychiatrists would recognize as post-traumatic stress disorder. They jumped at loud noises, refused to patrol alone, and many requested medical discharge from service. Kelthax, now promoted to Supreme Fleet Commander, after his predecessor was killed in a human suicide attack, found himself in the unprecedented position of requesting permission to use planet-killing weapons. The humans cannot be conquered through conventional means, he reported to the High Command. I request authorization to use stellar torpedo weapons to destroy their homeworld completely. The stellar torpedoes were the Vorthak Empire's ultimate weapon, designed to trigger stellar collapse and destroy entire solar systems. They had never been used because no enemy had ever required such extreme measures. You are requesting permission to destroy an entire star system to defeat a primitive species with projectile weapons, Elder War Commander Zathan asked in disbelief. Yes, Elder Commander. It is the only way to end this war. The request sparked fierce debate among the High Command. Many argued that using their ultimate weapon against such a primitive enemy would be seen as a sign of weakness throughout the galaxy. Others pointed out that the human virus was spreading and needed to be stopped before it infected the entire empire. While the Vorthak debated, the human resistance was preparing for this possibility. Hai-Jin Lee had spent months developing a communication system that could instantly contact every human agent throughout the galaxy. They're going to try to destroy our solar system, she told Byung-Ho Kim during their emergency meeting. Our intelligence sources in their fleet confirm it. Then we need to make sure the galaxy knows what that means, Byung-Ho replied. If they're willing to destroy an entire star system just to stop an idea, what does that say about the idea? The final human broadcast was prepared in a hidden bunker beneath the ruins of Geneva. It would be transmitted simultaneously to every world in the Vorthak Empire, using communication relays that human agents had been secretly installing for months. President Kyung-Soo An, older and more weathered but still unbroken, recorded the message that would be his species' last gift to the galaxy. People of the galaxy, he began, this is President An of Earth. By the time you receive this message, our world may be destroyed. The Vorthak Empire has decided that our refusal to surrender is so dangerous that they must kill our star to stop us. He paused, looking directly into the camera. But they're too late. The idea has already spread. You don't have to live on your knees. You don't have to accept slavery just because your enemies have better weapons. You can choose to stand up, to fight back, to say no. The broadcast ended with images of human resistance fighters, children carrying messages through bombed cities, elderly people making weapons in hidden factories, soldiers charging alien positions with nothing but rifles and determination. This is what humans look like when we refuse to surrender, the narrator's voice explained. This is what any species looks like when they choose freedom over safety. The message spread across the galaxy like wildfire. On 47 worlds, enslaved populations watched the images of humans fighting impossible odds and refusing to give up. Many had never seen anything like it. As the broadcast reached its conclusion, something unprecedented happened throughout the Vorthak Empire. On world after world, enslaved populations began to stand up. They had learned the lesson the humans died to teach them, that sometimes the choice between slavery and death wasn't really a choice at all. The greatest empire in galactic history suddenly found itself facing rebellions on every front, all inspired by the example of one small blue world whose people simply refused to quit fighting. The Vorthak had feared human guns when they first encountered them. But guns had never been humanity's real weapon. Their real weapon was the unbreakable human spirit, and that weapon was now spreading across the galaxy like a plague of freedom. 5 years after the first human broadcast spread across the galaxy, the Vorthak Empire was collapsing. On 47 worlds that had once been peaceful slave colonies, rebellions raged with a ferocity that shocked the galaxy. The virus of human resolve had spread far beyond what anyone could have imagined. Former Supreme War Leader Thirak sat in a detention cell on what had once been the capital world of Vorthakia. The prison was run by a coalition of former slaves from a dozen different species, all of whom had learned the same lesson, that freedom was worth any price. His captor was Viraki, the Zelani mining supervisor who had led the first rebellion on Kepler 442b. She now served as one of the leaders of the Free Worlds Alliance, a growing coalition of liberated planets. Why? Thyrak asked her during one of their conversations. Your people lived peacefully under our rule for 50 years. Why throw away that stability for this chaos? Viraki looked at the former war leader with eyes that had seen too much suffering. Because we learned something from the humans. Peace. Without freedom isn't peace at all. It's just a slower form of death. On Earth, now largely rebuilt thanks to aid from the liberated worlds, Ambassador Sujin Park prepared for the most important diplomatic meeting in human history. The Galactic Council, which had existed for thousands of years, but had been powerless to stop Vorthak expansion, was finally ready to acknowledge the new reality. The council chambers on the neutral world of Antares Prime had been designed for species that valued order and hierarchy. The curved seating arrangements and formal protocols reflected an ancient civilization that prized stability above all else. It was exactly the kind of thinking that had allowed the Vorthak Empire to grow unchallenged for centuries. Su-Jin entered the chamber wearing a simple human military uniform rather than diplomatic robes. The symbolism was intentional. Humanity had earned its place at this table through fighting, not negotiation. The council speaker, an ancient being called Zeth Kalar, from the Machine Intelligence Collective, activated the translation protocols. Ambassador Sujin Park of Earth, you addressed the Galactic Council for the first time. What is humanity's message to the galaxy? Sujin looked around the chamber at representatives from hundreds of worlds. Some had been Vorthak slaves until recently. Others had remained free only by staying hidden or making humiliating compromises. All of them had learned to see the galaxy through the lens of Vorthak power. Our message is simple, Sujin began. The age of conquest is over. No species will be allowed to build an empire on the backs of enslaved worlds. The galaxy has learned a new way to respond to aggression. Elder diplomat Welthara of the Andromedan Federation spoke from her floating platform. Humanity's resistance was impressive. But surely you understand that stability requires some form of order. The Vorthak, for all their faults, provided structure to the galaxy. Structure built on slavery isn't structure, Sujin replied. It's just organized oppression. The debate that followed would be remembered as the moment the galaxy chose its future. Some council members argued for a return to the old ways, with stronger species naturally dominating weaker ones. Others, particularly representatives from recently liberated worlds, supported the human position. On the liberated world of Proxima Centauri C. Oxun Lim was teaching a group of young Sylvani about human history. The tree-dwelling children listened with fascination to stories about Earth before the invasion, a world where different human nations sometimes fought, but ultimately learned to work together. Teacher Oxun, one young Sylvani asked, will all the free worlds learn to work together like humans did? Oke-san smiled, remembering her own childhood on Earth before the war. I hope so, little one. That's what we're trying to build, a galaxy where different species can disagree without enslaving each other. Back on Earth, Admiral Hyunwoo Park stood on the bridge of the UES New Determination, humanity's newest exploration vessel. His hair was gray now, and his face bore scars from the long war, but his eyes still held the same determination that had carried him through humanity's first encounter with the Vorthak. His crew was different from the one he had commanded during that first contact. Tactical Officer Minsu Kim was the daughter of So-Young Kim, who had died ramming a Vorthak cruiser during the Siege of Earth. Engineer Ha-Yun Lee was the niece of Tai-Min Lee, who had been killed defending an orbital station. But the biggest change was that his crew wasn't entirely human. At the navigation station sat Krixtal, a young Vorthak who had rejected his species' imperial past. The communications officer was Nalvan, a Zilani who had been born into slavery but was now a free citizen of the Alliance. Captain, Krixtal reported, using the human naval rank he had adopted, we're receiving a distress signal from the outer rim. Unknown alien vessels are threatening a trading convoy. Hyunwoo considered the situation. 3 years ago, such an incident would have been handled by whoever had the strongest fleet in the area. Now, the Free Worlds Alliance had established rapid response protocols based on human military doctrine. Set TUEDITER course for the distress signal, he ordered, and send word to Alliance Command. If someone's trying to start a new empire out there, they're about to learn why that's a bad idea. The response fleet that assembled around the trading convoy included ships from a dozen different species, all flying the blue and white flag of the Alliance. The would-be pirates who had thought to prey on defenseless merchants found themselves facing a coordinated force that fought with human-inspired tactics. The battle was short and decisive. The pirates, expecting easy prey, instead encountered defenders who had learned humanity's most important lesson: that freedom was worth fighting for, no matter the odds. In his detention cell, former Kelthax watched news reports of the battle on his cell's communication screen. He had been captured during the liberation of Vorthakia and was now serving as a historical consultant, helping Alliance researchers understand Vorthak military doctrine. "They fight like humans now," he observed to his guard, a human veteran, named Sergeant Moon Jae-ho. "All of them." "Not exactly like humans," Jae-ho replied. "They fight like free beings. That's what we were trying to teach them all along." Kelthax had spent years in captivity trying to understand how his empire had fallen to primitives with metal-throwing weapons. Only recently had he begun to understand that the weapons had never been the real threat. "Your species infected the galaxy with something more dangerous than any weapon," he told Jae-ho. "You taught them to value their freedom more than their lives." "That's not an infection," Jae-ho said quietly. "That's just what people are like when they're allowed to be people instead of slaves." The transformation of the galaxy continued. On worlds that had been enslaved for generations, new governments formed based on principles the humans had introduced. Not all of these experiments in freedom succeeded. Some worlds fell into chaos, others fragmented into competing factions. But even the failures were learning experiences, and gradually a new galactic order began to emerge. The Galactic Council, after months of debate, formally adopted what became known as the human doctrine, that no species had the right to conquer or enslave another, and that all free worlds had a duty to defend each other against aggression. Ambassador Sujin Park signed the charter on behalf of Earth, using a pen made from metal recovered from the ruins of Sol. As she signed, she thought about all the humans who had died to make this moment possible, from Commander Hyunwoo's original crew to President Kyung Soo-an, who had lived to see the liberation but died before the peace. "This pen is made from our destroyed cities," she told the assembled diplomats. "We signed this charter with metal that was once our homes, our schools, our hospitals. We want the galaxy to remember the price of freedom, so that price never has to be paid again." Years later, when historians wrote about the fall of the Vorthak Empire and the rise of the Free Worlds Alliance, they would struggle to explain how a primitive species with simple weapons had changed the course of galactic history. The answer was found not in human technology or tactics, but in something much simpler and more powerful. Humans had introduced the galaxy to an idea that proved more contagious than any plague: that some things were worth fighting for, regardless of the cost. The Vorthak had feared human guns when they first encountered them. They had dismissed those crude projectile weapons as primitive and ineffective. But guns were just tools, and tools could be improved or replaced. The real weapon that humans brought to the galaxy was something that couldn't be countered by better technology or superior firepower. It was the simple, stubborn, completely irrational human refusal to accept defeat when fighting for something they believed in. And once that weapon was released into the galaxy, it could never be contained again. Free beings throughout the stars had learned humanity's greatest lesson: that the choice between freedom and slavery was no choice at all. The galaxy would never be the same